like round of introductions. We'll do a little round of introductions here in a second, but I just wanted to thank everybody for showing up today and participating in this program. We've hit the 15-year mark and we're starting our 16th year, and so it's pretty epic, really, when you think about it. There's a lot of data, a lot of good stories, a lot of good things to come, I think. A lot of new directions that we're kind of planning. So we're pretty excited about it. I think everybody on the screen probably knows me by now, but just for introductions, we'll start with us three. You can see all three of us are in the room here. We've been kind of doing our Zoom meetings this way for the last few months, ever since Bushra got here, and I think it's been kind of fun because it makes you feel like you're actually in a meeting, as opposed to, you know, we're all sitting in our offices that are all one wall apart, you know, looking at three separate screens. And so this way we get to sit in the room and like poke each other and nudge each other and wink and you know, actually have some aside comments like you would at a regular meeting. And so we find it pretty helpful, or I find it helpful. I think maybe I'm probably forcing it on these two, but I find it helpful to have everybody in the room. And it also kind of demonstrates, I think it demonstrates that that we're also, this group right here is the toxicity and contaminants program sort of science leads, and we're really pushing this TCP concept as much as we can. Really excited to have Tony here to do this with us because of his toxicology background, and we think that there's going to be some cool projects coming up through SWAMP that are going to be toxicology related. So we're pretty excited about that as well. So again, I'm Bryn Phillips, and I'll let these two guys introduce each other, and then we'll kind of go through the committee and some other folks.
I'm Bushra Khan. This is my second SRC. So for those of you who were not here last time, I joined MPSL in August of 2022. So it's been 8-9 months. And I'm a toxicologist by training. I'm thrilled to be here, and thank you everyone for joining.
Hello, Katie Siegler, and I've been with the SPoT program since the beginning. It's good to see everyone again today.
Can we go through and have the SRC introduce themselves, please? Do you want me to call names? Go ahead, Kelly.
I figured you'd pick on me.
You're right up there in the top of the screen. I couldn't help it. You're the next person.
Yeah, I can't see, you know, Zoom always puts you in the first block, and then I had my self view, so I have no idea where I am on your screen, and maybe that's
Yeah. No, you're high priority.
So in addition to joking, I'm Kelly Moran. I'm a senior scientist at the San Francisco Estuary Institute. I've been on the SRC for a while. I've worked on water pollution from consumer products, traditional pollutants like copper and zinc, brake pads and tires, pesticides, and now I'm part of the emerging contaminants and microplastics program at the San Francisco Estuary Institute, and designing new programs for us in the stormwater arena to move into emerging contaminants and support our work to support the state developing a statewide microplastic strategy. So thrilled to be here, avid user of the data here, and eager to find partnerships to strengthen this program.
Lee, you're next.
Hi, I'm Ashley Parks, and I'm a senior scientist with Exponent. I believe this is my second year on this committee, so I'm pleased to, be here and working with everyone. My background is in environmental chemistry and toxicology. So I've looked at, the environmental fate, transport, and toxicology of nanomaterials. I've done a lot of work with some regional monitoring programs and site-specific objective studies for copper.
Mary?
Morning, everyone. Mary Hamilton. I'm the scientist at the Waterboard in the Central Coast region. I've been involved with the monitoring programs at this region and with the SPoT program since their inception, and now just working with some of the other programs in addition to our monitoring programs, including agriculture and our standards and assessment programs here at the Waterboard.
Rob?
Hi, I'm Robert Budd. I'm a research scientist with the surface water program at DPR. And Bryn, you always do a really great job of dating me because putting it in perspective of 15 years, I think I've been working with you almost since the beginning. So that kind of helps date us. So, but yeah, it's always a pleasure to be part of this collaboration. I think we have a lot of great joint efforts to collect pesticide related data for the state projects. So I'm really happy to always join this group.
Glad to have you. Jim?
Hi, I'm Jim Orlando. I'm a hydrologist with the Pesticide Fate Research Group at the California Water Science Center of U.S. Geological Survey. I've been with this group for a couple of years now, and I've worked with many of you for a couple decades now, I imagine, going along the theme of working together for many, many years. I look forward to continuing this process. I look forward to seeing how SPoT's going to evolve over the next couple of years. Seems like we've got some promising things in the works here. So I'm looking forward to hearing about that today. And great to see you all. Hopefully we can see each other in person soon. I was at the IEP conference a couple weeks ago, and that was really nice to be able to see folks in person and get to talk to folks. So hopefully we can do that with this group.
That would be nice. We'll work on that. I think now that we're having the Swamp Roundtable, our first face-to-face Swamp Roundtable is next week. And so I think that that's kind of sort of setting things in motion, setting a precedent for having face-to-face meetings with state board stuff. So maybe the next SRC meeting we can meet face-to-face. We'll work on that. I'm not really sure how many people are on the phone, but I'd be happy to go through some introductions just so people can give a shout out to who they are, especially some folks that are a little bit unfamiliar to me. So if you guys, like usually with the roundtables, we go through region by region. We start with region 1, 2, 3. Is there anybody from region 1 here? Region 2? I see Rebecca.
Hi, Rebecca Norton-Holt, Region 2 Swamp and the Urban Pesticide TMDL lead.
Excellent. Thanks for coming, Rebecca.
Yeah,
I know Mary's there from Region 3 already, and I see Peter Meertens. Peter, you want to say hello?
Oh yeah, hello. Great to see you. And not much else to add. I work on pesticides, and I'm working on a neonicotinoid TMDL. So just started.
Excellent.
Thanks.
Love hearing that. Emily?
Hi, Emily Duncan, Region 4.
Nice to see you, Emily. Looking forward to working with you too. Anybody from, there's Alicia from Region 5.
Yeah, good morning. This is Alicia. Sorry, my camera's not working, but happy to see you guys.
Nice seeing you too, or not seeing you. If your camera was working. Sorry.
And this is Matt Krause.
Kelly, I see you here from Region 6.
Hi, yeah, this is Kelly. Also, my camera's not plugged in, but I can plug it in later if I need to.
Okay.
But
Did I miss
you.
somebody from Region 5?
It's Matt Krause from Region 5.
Hey Matt, how's it going?
Good.
Okay. Wouldn't have expected Jeff to be here from 7. Anybody from 8?
Yeah, this is Jason Pressler, Coastal TMDL section, San Diego region.
Thanks for coming, Jason.
And this is Terry Reeder. I'm the senior engineering geologist for our coastal waters planning section. Jason's one of my staff, and we're working both on legacy pesticides, current use pesticides, copper, and just interested in seeing how this program is evolving. We also have a microplastics study. We've done a dry weather study, and we're starting the wet weather study this fiscal year.
Excellent. And Chad?
Good morning. Chad Laughlin with Region 9, and I oversee our monitoring unit.
Excellent.
Good morning. My name is Hiram Saravia. I work under Chad Laughlin for the Monitoring, Assessment, and Research Unit. Bryn, the last time we spoke briefly about sharing a spatial regression that we had done. I'm happy to follow up with you on that. This is with regards to analyzing the spatial data that you have.
Excellent. Okay, let's follow up together in the next couple of weeks.
Great, thank you.
Anybody else want to introduce themselves?
See a couple of folks from DTSC. Thanks for calling. No, I'm just kidding. I'm Anne Cooper-Doherty, and I lead the Chemical Evaluation Unit at the Safer Consumer Products Program within DTSC. Glad to be here. And Tom's here too.
And I'm Tom Bruton, also with the Safer Consumer Products Program at DTSC. Good to be here.
And good morning. I'm Hannah Schoolmeister, also with the Safer Consumers Products Program with DTSC. And I've worked on both brake pads with copper and 6PPD in tires.
And any other Waterboards folks? Thinkers.
Yeah, I'm here. Hi, Tessa. Good morning. It's Wendy Lake. I'm in the Division of Water Quality, and I help lead the PFAS investigation efforts in regards to the water quality side, and also help us. I'm essentially a liaison between water quality and the Division of Drinking Water for PFAS.
My name is Sarah Huber. I'm an engineer with the State Waterboards Emergency Management Program, kind of just tracking this effort from sort of a fire management standpoint, emerging pollutant standpoint, and just trying to see where this could potentially be used for recommending monitoring programs for the State Operations Center when we're called to the support Cali estimators. Thank you.
Well, good. Thanks for coming, everybody. You'll see that we're actually represented on a couple of screens in this Zoom meeting, and it's because we got like 4 different computers going here. I feel like I'm at NASA or something, controlling a space launch. But we're just trying to make sure that we can see the presentation and we can see everybody's faces and we can see comments, and we're all sitting in the same room. So you might see a couple of different views of us as the meeting progresses. For most of you, this will be the first time you're seeing this PowerPoint, but I sent this PowerPoint out about 10 days ago to the committee and to a couple of the state board people, just so they could kind of review some of the data and some of the concepts that we want to discuss today. And so they weren't seeing it cold. And so hopefully you guys had a chance to kind of mull it over and ponder it and come up with some good questions or comments about some of the data we have and some of the ideas we have for moving forward with SPoT. Going through the meeting, just a brief agenda. The way I always look at SPoT SRC meetings is it always seems like one big agenda item to me whenever I'm up here kind of, doing these presentations and spieling along. Everything seems to kind of run together, but when I broke it down, it did actually seem like there were distinct groupings of information that we were going to discuss. So this is what our agenda looks like today. I'm thinking it's going to be about 2.5 or 3 hours total. We'll take a break at some point, between 10:30 maybe. But we're going to talk about the goals of the meeting and some of the discussion points. We're going to give some of the history within that those discussion points, some of the history of SPoT, some of the issues we've encountered in the last few years that are leading us into certain budgetary decisions and certain directions that we want to go. And so it's kind of a larger story that goes a bit beyond just the trends that we've been monitoring for the last 15 years. We're going to briefly discuss the new format for our management questions and solicit some feedback from you all if anybody has anything to say about those. The bulk of the slides are our trends updates. SPoT has been looking at a lot of different analyte groups as well as toxicology. And so we just want to run through what those trends look like and how we're currently doing the analysis and presenting the data. We're going to have a brief slide about the budget that just sort of demonstrates where SPoT is in its never-ending quest for expanded budgets and more money and the ability to do more stuff that we want to do. And then we're going to revisit our non-targeted analysis topic. I was pretty cavalier in our last SRC meeting, sort of pitching at non-targeted analysis as the end all and be all. And I am a more educated person this time around. But I still think non-targeted analysis is the end all and be all. And I think it's gonna give us a lot of good stuff. And so again, we're gonna tell you what we know about it based on some new data that we have from a SPoT related project. And then also, you know, hear what you guys have to say now that we're 6 months further on in this topic. And then we'll probably wrap up, like I said, hopefully around 11 or 11:30. I'm sorry, 11:30 or 12. Okay, the discussion points for today's meeting. These are sort of broad and somewhat overlapping, but this will give you a bit of a background as to the direction SPoT is going. Oh, and just another housekeeping rule for SPoT SRC meetings is anybody's allowed to talk at any time. And so if you guys have any comments or anything about anything I'm talking about, just interrupt and you know, I may or may not see a hand get raised in the PowerPoint. Maybe these guys can help me keep an eye on that, but just feel free to just shout out your questions or comments. So probably if you guys know the history of the organic chemistry analysis in SPoT, we traditionally worked with the Water Pollution Control Laboratory, which is a Department of Fish and Wildlife laboratory in Rancho Cordova. And they provided some pretty solid data for us over the years. They ceased doing business around 2017, and we went with a SCORP to finish up our data analysis for 2017. Our data set from 2008 to 2017, I would consider to be of fairly high quality. In 2018, we embarked on a statewide or chemistry contract for the organics analysis, and the state water board put out a request for proposal, and we went with a commercial laboratory that farmed out analyses to a number of other laboratories. And I think for the most part, for SWAMP as a program, the data were probably pretty good. And but with the contaminants work that we were doing, we definitely found some glitches in our data. And I'll show you a bit of how that looks in terms of the history of the other data in the next slide, in the next couple of slides. But basically, we've decided that we for this year, for SPoT 2023, we're searching out what we consider to be a more capable laboratory. And so this year we're going to be going with SGS Axis to do the organics analysis for spot samples. Unfortunately, even with the rising costs of the chemistry samples through our current contract, the SGS access prices are even higher. So, but I figure you get what you pay for, and there's certainly some data sets that really need a year of high quality data to really sort of either give us the opportunity to decide to continue monitoring that trend, or to really sort of put that trend to rest for a few years within the framework of the larger SPoT program. So we're probably going to be analyzing, we are, based on the plan, we are going to be analyzing fewer samples this year, and try to look at that in context with our decision making for future non-targeted analysis, targeted analysis rather. Secondly, in our discussion points, we have a 3-year budget plan, and the thing about SPoT is it's always had the same budget. Since its inception in 2008, SPoT's had a $650,000 a year budget. And we have a $650,000 a year budget for this year, and we're going to have a $650,000 a year budget through 2026. And as we all know from the price of gas, you know, things are a lot more expensive these days. And even though Granite Canyon, MPSL has kept the toxicity prices fairly consistent, everything's just more expensive. And so we're still faced with having to do not even more with less, but just having to do the same amount of work we always do with less money. And so we're doing a pretty good job of kind of, you know, redesigning the program once again. And we've done this a few times before in SPoT's history, where we look at the money and we say, well, let's really focus on what questions are most important. And so I think with that in mind, you know, we're just going to have to do our best. I know Kelly Moran has always said to us, you know, well, you just have to get more money. and you know, I think we're definitely heading in the direction of working, you know, doing some collaborations, getting some external funding that'll hopefully build up some components of SPoT that will maybe take us in some new directions. So we'll talk more about that in a little bit. But we're basically having to cut back our analysis of 90 sites to 40 sites for a couple of the analyte groups. And so we'll show you that when we look at our budget slide. For 25 and 26, we also held back a little bit of the funding into the UC Davis contract. And this is with the idea of possibly doing some additional targeted analysis that, based on what we're learning in the next couple of years of data, or possibly doing some additional non-targeted analysis. And so we kind of held that card back so we could decide how we want to play it in 2025 and 2026. So like I said, last time around, I was thinking that NTA could answer a lot of questions for SPoT. And I still think that non-targeted analysis can. And we're going to have a slide that shows a little bit of the data from a pilot project that we've been working on, and discuss things like reporting limits and MDLs. But I think that the question that I'd like to pose to this larger group is, what can non-targeted analysis do for SPoT? Even though Tom Young, who's doing our non-targeted analysis right now for this pilot project, has said NTA is not a substitute for targeted analysis. And his main reason for that is the lack of sensitivity. But we feel like, based on the reporting limits, we've seen that sometimes the sensitivity can be comparable, and we feel like it can provide trends in its own right, and also answer many of the other questions that that are related to this kind of larger realignment process within the state water board of having these statewide projects actually branch out to other working groups so that you know, everybody can get the data they need. Like you know, we've been working with the CEC working group. You know, we feel like even working with other groups like DTSC is going to benefit from some of the ideas we have with NTA. We also learned from Tom and his technician Anna Fierick that they've been really doing some great statistical analysis linking some of the toxicity observations we have with the non-targeted results. And so we're not only getting these analyte lists that have some measure of quantification, but we're also getting the how should I say, we're figuring out which of these known contaminants from this NTA list are related to the toxicology. And there's something in those data that will please Ann Cooper once we get to that slide in a little bit. I'm giving you all kinds of teasers. So I mentioned this collaboration that we're having with this current pilot project. This is discussion point 4. So we've been doing this non-targeted analysis on 30 SPoT sites, and we've been linking those data with our standard sediment toxicity test results. We're also embarking on some behavioral analysis. So we're going to be doing some behavior assays with this. That's been the slowest component of this particular project, but we do have our Noldus EcoVision in-house now, and so Busher's been working on getting that up and running, so we'll be doing those tests this year. But the main idea behind this project was to link sort of traditional toxicology and chemistry measurements with kind of these newer toxicology and chemistry measurements. Specifically, this targeted analysis, this non-targeted analysis, and then these traditional sediment exposures with these behavior exposures. So we're starting to get some pretty cool data from that, and it'll be exciting to see a little bit more of that as the months roll by. We're just now getting the analyte lists in, so there's going to be a lot of data to chew on for that. The interesting thing about that project, though, is it actually has led to this collaboration with the CEC work group, who was at our last SRC meeting, and they, in hearing about what SPoT was doing, they had this perfect vehicle for their funding, which was to piggyback on SPoT sites. We're going to do toxicity and NTA at 20 SPoT sites. We're going to do some bioanalytical endpoints. We're going to do sediment and water from all of these sites, and then we'll throw those all into a mix, and we'll see how these things compare. And so we're not only building on the 30 SPoT sites from the first pilot project, but we're actually repeating some of those sites in this second project with CEC. And the cool thing about this collaboration with the CEC work group is there's a lot of energy behind it, and a lot of good, to be honest, funding. There's good funding behind it. And so this is going to help us to expand this basic research with non-targeted analysis and see what it can get us in terms of the quantification that we would like in order to preserve some of our more traditional trends that we've been monitoring. One of the things that was mentioned in the previous SRC meeting is the cost of potential costs of NTA, and I got to tell you, like right now, things are pretty similar between targeted and non-targeted. The targeted analysis is becoming quite expensive. So these are all things to consider as we move forward. We think we have a pretty good plan for that. So we'll we'll show you that plan at the very end. So you'll have to sit through the whole meeting. Anybody have any questions about anything? All good so far?
Mary's got a hand.
Go ahead, Mary.
Friend, hey, I'm just wondering about how we'll get visibility for this group and others on the parameters list in each of these groups, the non-target analysis, the bioanalytical endpoints and others, as well as just the standard suite of chemicals we'll be analyzing within the lab. You don't have to answer that now, but that's something I'm very interested in getting my eyes on at some point.
So I think, I mean, we're gonna I don't want to say we're gonna sell this thing hard, but I think that, if you look at the state of the field right now, these are measurements that are increasingly being used, is my understanding. And so I think that Bushra's idea is, we're going to give a presentation on this topic at next week's roundtable. So we'll start to discuss this with, under the umbrella of the toxicity and contaminants program. We'll discuss this with the larger swamp community, and that'll hopefully spread the word a little bit. But Bushra has a plan to attend the National CTAC meeting this year and present some of our data there. But also, whether it's this year or next year, we're also trying to put together some CTAC sessions to actually start to bring together other talks. And so I think that, we're looking for a national audience on this as well. So some larger collaborations and potential funding partners.
Yes, your had a question.
My camera is back to working again. Thank you. I apologize if you already showed this in the slide, but I was wondering about specific bioassays for the non-targeted analysis. Are you talking about things like P450 human reporter gene system? I don't know what kinds of specific.
We have 5. We don't have P450 but we have 5 receptor assays, including the estrogen receptor, so ER alpha. We have PPAR alpha. Then we have glucocorticoid, AHR, and androgen. So those are the 5 that we are targeting right now. And based on what we get, as this project develops and moves forward, we can change, replace, but the first phase includes these 5.
I see. Yeah, just the P4, I mentioned the P450 because it's been used here in San Diego before to look at sediments in San Diego Bay. It was a P450 human reported gene system, which uses AHR receptor. And it has good correlation of, it covers a broad range of including dioxin-like compounds, coplanar PCBs, PAHs. It's a good assay to use, and I believe somebody at UC Davis took the original technology and developed, I guess maybe a new version of that assay called the KLOX assay. So that's a good one to use too, and there's precedent for that. I could send you a citation. For that.
That'd be great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sharon.
I would just add to what Bryn said about getting more visibility within CTAC and other groups, local and national. There are groups within CTAC who have been talking about effects-based monitoring for a while now, and within the CTAC North America and CTAC Europe, there are groups who are proposing effects-based trigger values and that sort of discussion. So we think that what we are proposing fits into the bigger picture of the effects-based trigger values. Of course, we're not there yet, but I think within local CTACs and the bigger North America CTAC, there's a good audience for that. So we're definitely going to do that. And once we think that it's at a place where we can put together like a commentary or perspective paper for a journal, we're also planning on doing that.
Okay, on to the management questions. So the SPoT management questions have a new format, and so we created this graphic, actually modeled initially on the regional monitoring program from the document that Kelly sent me, but then kind of morphed into a more state water board swamp type document. So it's in alignment with the other statewide programs under swamp. And we've basically repackaged the management questions. I don't think they've changed significantly. They're just put into a format that's a lot easier to understand and see the flow of. I think in the previous reports, our management questions covered about 7 or 8 or 9 pages of text, and they were a little bit squirrely. But these are this is a little bit easier to see, and I believe I believe Kelly was responsible for the phrase of turning data into information, and so we sort of grabbed onto that, and our idea is to try to really make that happen. And so if you follow through, there's our 4 basic management questions that sort of reflect the previous questions. We have our annual sediment toxicity tests and targeted contaminant measurements, and there's our data. And then we have to turn those data into information. And so we can look at the links, we can bring in data from other sources, we can get responses from the communities and the groups we're working with, and we can feed that all back into adapting our questions or our monitoring design. So we feel like it's pretty straightforward. There's some products down there on the box, the gray box that's on the left: data visualizations, findings and recommendations, papers and presentations, website content. And so if anybody has any, I wanted to throw these out here, so just give people a chance to comment on it. You can, if you'd rather, you can send us comments through email. But if anybody wants to discuss anything about these right now, some of the tweaks were the responsibility of the State Water Board, and so it's good that we have some State Water Board people here so they can address questions related to that. Does anybody have anything that they want to say about this?
Kelly,
go ahead, Kelly.
First, I just want to say I like this. I like the flow chart. I like the thinking that is reflected in it, and I realize that it probably took a lot of time and a bunch of people to get there. So I really want to acknowledge and thank everyone who worked on it. I think the management questions are pretty big, especially for the budget that's here. The one that particularly catches my eye is, can the causes of toxicity be determined? That's pretty hard to do with just a monitoring program at the bottom of the watershed. So linking back to causes, particularly when we think a lot of those causes might be consumer products, pesticides, at least we know how they were used. Other kinds of products, not so much.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something that could be a big budget sink if it was really an investment by the State Water Board. It's important to note that in California, we don't have a program to do that. So the closer we can get in terms of getting any information out of this program, it's super helpful. I know DTSC and DPR have been very eager users of the data. So just flagging that causes one as being a particularly difficult question. And then I was just curious, what is information from other sources? It says special studies and research through TCP, and I didn't know what TCP was.
So TCP is our toxicology and contaminants program. that's basically, we discussed this a couple of meetings ago where we're in the process of rebranding. Even though this is a SPoT SRC meeting, we're considering SPoT a program within the larger TCP. So the toxicity and contaminants program is going to be, this larger state water board program that tries to address toxicity and contaminant questions. And then SPoT is sort of the flagship project underneath that program.
And maybe I can add a little more from our state water board perspective. So yes, those management questions are big, but we kind of needed to follow our swamp guidance on what we're supposed to have. But you will see in the updated QAP, the Quality Assurance Project Plan that is almost out the door, we have some more specific questions laid out in there that just kind of didn't fit in the flow chart in the overall big picture. So that's where we do drill down a little bit more and say, like, here's what we're actually going to try to answer, with the data we're collecting this year or in the next few years. And it was a labor of love, and definitely started with your concepts, Kelly. So we thank you as well. But and as well, I just wanted to add too on the toxicology and contaminant program. Yeah, we kind of realized recently that all of our other statewide swamp programs, we organize them a little bit differently than SPoT. And so we're kind of trying to get SPoT into our, kind of how we organize our other statewide programs. So like for our other programs, we have like a bioaccumulation monitoring program, and we've got like 3 or 4 ongoing projects under that, kind of differentiate what they're looking at and where they're looking. And similar for our bioassessment monitoring program. So we realized like SPoT is the only like quirky one that had this like very specific project name. That's a weird acronym that you don't even know what they're talking about. So we were like, let's call it what it is, toxicology and contaminants. So people know what this even is about, instead of just like, if you know what SPoT is, but if you don't really have a clue. So yes, we're sort of in this transition, trying to like bring that more to the fore of like, this is a toxicology and contaminants program. SPoT has been our cornerstone, project of that. And then I think it's gonna take us a little while to kind of shift into that bigger mind state, because SPoT is such a big part of it. But now I think we're just kind of trying to show like there are other things that we've been doing related to toxicology and contaminants, and we can put them all under this umbrella and show how they're all connected. So it's I'm sure there's going to be transition and realizations over the next few years as we kind of make this shift, but we're trying to start.
Cool. So one thing you said that's not in the flowchart, but it's really important, is that you're annually taking a look and saying what are our near-term priority questions for SPoT. Yeah, we do that too in the regional monitoring program. In fact, I'm running through an exercise right now for the next few years for our stormwater work. And it's a really cool thing, and it is an extra step, but it helps us make sure that we've got realistic questions. Thanks.
Go ahead, Rob.
Oh, hi. Yeah, so I just have kind of like I guess you'd call it a philosophical question related to the first question, but you've already hinted at this potentially decreasing number of sites that you're going to be looking at, and that it's been varied through the years. So my question is related to like the type of program SPoT wants to be in terms of targeted versus more of a probabilistic approach, or more encompassing of all land use types. Over the years, you've gone up to over 100 sites and then scaling it down to 40. And when you scale down to 40, you usually sort of target more land use based questions. So I guess that's kind of my general question is, what type of program is SPoT leaning towards being more, you know, answering the big questions of how are all the watersheds in California doing, you know, on an overall basis, or are we trying to like really link the contaminants to the sources, and which is based on land use. So it just is a different, I just am trying to get an idea of that, because that sort of drives how you set up the sampling regime, right? So that's my question overall.
I'll have a stab at that. So that is a great question. And that's actually in a lot of ways the question we've been kind of leading to in the last couple of SRC meetings, that there is this, I feel like there's a shift happening within SPoT to redefine it a little bit. And we came up with these management questions. We were maintaining these broad sort of old school management questions, but looking at trying to answer them in some ways that are a little different, maybe a little bit more affordable, and maybe you know, just as broad-based as what we've been doing. We're maintaining the 90 sites, and we're doing the toxicity testing at the 90 sites. And so that's still going to be the basis of this program. It's going to be us looking at using toxicology as a screen for what's going on at night in these 90 watersheds. We're not going to make any claims about, you know, the state of the health of California watersheds. That's the bioassessment program's question. And but our question is really about, you know, what is the toxicology going on at the base of these watersheds? What are the contaminants that could be driving that toxicology? And how do we relate those things back to land use? I think SPoT's been pretty good at that so far, but as Kelly mentions, you know, things are a lot more complicated out there. You know, there's a lot of other contaminants than what SPoT can afford to measure. And so we've you know, we're continuing to paint ourselves into a corner in a way with some of the contaminant work that we've been doing. The toxicology is alive and well. I mean, we're picking up all kinds of weird things out there. You know, I mean, just for example, in Region 6, and we had this discussion with Kelly Huck recently, Bishop Creek, which had been not toxic for 15 years or for 14 years, you know, suddenly had 4% survival with Hyalella azteca in the 15th year. And for those of you that have been to the city of Bishop, doesn't seem like it's a very toxic place, but that's you know, this sample was pretty hot, and you know, we let Kelly know, and we're looking at maybe expanding some of the analyte groups at that site for when we visit that site in the fall. And so this is the kind of thing that toxicity points out, you know, like no amount of chemical analysis of that sediment, well, you know, thousands and thousands of dollars of chemical analysis of that sediment might have reached the same conclusion, but the toxicology told us immediately that there's something strange going on, and it bears some additional investigation. So the toxicology side of it, I think, is going to continue going on. It's this targeted contaminant measurements that we have that are a little bit more difficult. I think that we do want to be that program that looks at those numbers, but again, the list is getting quite long, and we have to examine some other ways of doing it. And we're starting to dabble with that now with NTA. And I think, you know, getting the data, but we've been like pushing Tom and Anna so hard to get us data for this meeting, and we have a skosh of it, but not as much as I wanted. And because I just really wanted to lay out all these data for you guys and show you how things were progressing. But we'll have to just wait for the next meeting for that. But I do have a teaser on that. But again, you know, this set of analytes that we're getting out of the NTA it's so much broader than any of the targeted analysis that SPoT can do. And so it's just deciding, is that the direction that we need to go? How much of the targeted do we need to maintain? Are we in a transition where we're starting to shift from one to the other? What will be, you know, what are we sacrificing by doing that? What are we adding by doing that? So these are questions that we've been struggling with, you know, us here in this room. And we're just trying to, you know, we're trying to decide. And so we're kind of throwing a bunch of stuff out there for you guys to look at. To address the question of, you know, can the causes of toxicity, you know, be identified or be determined, depending on what terminology you want to use. We are seeing, again, with you know, I'm going to sound like I've sounded in the last meeting, which is ridiculous. Some of the analysis we've seen from Anna Fierick is demonstrating, you know, some correlative relationships between the toxicity that we've observed, the different toxicity endpoints in the sediment analysis, and the different toxicity endpoints we've observed in when we've tested the extracts of these sediments for the behavior tests. We're seeing relationships with you know, the usual castic characters, you know, like bifenthrin and permethrin and fipronil, but also some other contaminants that SPoT doesn't normally measure. And so we're finding out that there is some correlation between these contaminant concentrations and this toxicology in these analyte groups that SPoT's not picking up through the targeted analysis. So this is going to let us know, even if it's not using as sensitive a method as a targeted analysis, it lets us know what to target and what to investigate and maybe what direction to go in. So I think, again, from the toxicology and contaminant side of things, I think we're gonna maybe build some new trends here to go with our old trends. And I think that's what SPoT's been wanting to do all along. You know, we've had situations where, well, let me click to the next slide.
Bryn, Jim actually had a
but
question.
I'm gonna, go ahead. I want Jim to be able to weigh in before I do that.
Thanks, Bryn. And
Sorry.
just a quick
I was
question.
monologuing.
So it really, when you brought up the Bishop Creek results, right? That's something that catches your eye really quickly, right? So does the program have a set of steps or guidance they go through when they have something like that pop up? Do you address it with like NTA or something, or is there another set of procedures you go through when something that's really different like that comes up, and that can be addressed through these? That can be tied back into these monitoring questions and things like that.
The program doesn't really have anything specific. We, you know, we're working across the entire state. We're working with 9 really diverse regional boards, and with that all have different priorities. You know, some have really big contaminant fish to fry and some don't. You know, when Region 6 sees a really contaminated sample in their region, which is, you know, sort of the Eastern Sierra, that raises a pretty big red flag. You know, it's completely different than when there's, you know, like Bouquet Canyon Creek in Region 4, you know, that has 0% survival year after year after year after year, you know. And so the priority for Emily down in Region 4 might be something other than Bouquet Canyon Creek. So we try to point out the anomalies to the regional board representatives for Swamp, and then kind of put the ball into their court and let them run with it. I'm happy to work, you know, as the toxicology and contaminants program, you know, we're happy to work with those regions to try to dig in deeper and answer some questions, but it's all funding based and priority based. So, you know, we're going to go with we're going to follow other people's leads, but SPoT itself does not have any kind of proper protocol to follow.
I'm just wondering if any of that can lead to additional funding that could come into the program from other sources to sort of follow up these red flags, you know, just to try and bring some additional funding in.
Yeah. And I would say, you know, like Region 7 has been doing a lot of toxicity work over the last few years because they have found, I think in a lot in part because SPoT identified toxicity in their site. So that each region has their own swamp budget that they can put towards more work. So that has happened in the past, and I think could happen here.
We're also changing the way that we do some of the data analysis this year with more of a focus on the individual site trends as opposed to these statewide trends where things can get really washed out because of the variability throughout the state. So some of that specific site information will be a little more visible, maybe a little more clear year to year. That's a good point.
And one thing, just to add on to the toxicity causes, one thing that Bryn mentioned was the correlations between toxicity endpoints and some of the NTA work we're doing. So that kind of guides us. It's not causation, of course, but it guides us to what could be driving the toxicity. The other thing that Bryn mentioned about the CEC work group, we're doing some of these effects-based markers. Again, not causation, but it can direct us or guide us into the direction of what could be causing toxicity. It does provide some information which can be related to toxicity.
I do think the real power of NTA is tying it in with toxicity information, because otherwise it's a big rabbit hole that you can go down and
absolutely
spend a lot of time and a lot of money on. But if you can tie it into, pair it up with some both toxic and non-toxic samples, that really helps it out a lot. Thanks, guys.
And then I'm going to add just one last thing on that management question. We worked hard on how to write that one, and really it's asked as a yes or no question. Can you determine this? And we were expecting a lot of times the answer to be, no, we don't have enough information. Like we have X, Y, and Z data, and it doesn't seem to tell the whole story. And then that's where you kind of have to try to get, funding for a special study or try other methods, but our basic SPoT analytes may not tell that whole story. So I was remembering, we settled on the way that question is asked, not as yes, we answered everything, but just saying we can tell part of that story, but not all of it with the data we have. And that's actually, what we're looking for here.
Mary.
I do want to move on to the next slide because I'm excited about the parameters. But I didn't want us to pass over the fourth question here. And my curiosity is, in what way are you able to tie together regulatory actions to evaluate that question if they're effective at reducing toxicity? Or is that a question being posed to the regions and the state board? I'm wondering what your thoughts are on how what information will we use to answer that question?
Yeah, and sorry, Bryn, I'll jump on this one too, but we definitely added the word statewide to that question to specify that we cannot usually determine if it's effective on a site by site, watershed by watershed basis, because there's just so much going on. But things where we have had some success at looking at things are the DPR pyrethroid regulations, where we're looking at a bigger picture over time, and it's this bigger action that probably is implemented in variable ways across site to site, but over time at a large scale, we have seen some changes that we think are attributed to that. And, I think similar with the copper brake pad stuff, we can't really determine that on an individual site basis because we can't get into all the details of every site and what actions have taken place there. But at a statewide level, we think we can sometimes say something.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Okay, that was awesome. Thanks for that. So looking at a glimpse of SPoT history, I've showed this table before. It's updated through 2022, and it's kind of a, our backbone, if you will, of all of the things that we've measured over the years. You can see that in the second row, the number of sites have changed. It's been 90 for the last 5 years, which has been great. A couple of different toxicity tests, high level since the beginning, Chironomus at starting at 40 sites in 2015, and we're at 60 sites for that that organism now. And then the contaminants, the contaminant list, the standard contaminants, and should I keep losing this slide? And you can see how some contaminants come and some contaminants go. And then we talked about you know, SPoT's always tried to be adaptable. You know, like we've added fipronil in 2013. You know, we looked at microcystin for a few years. We've added PFAS compounds in 2021. And so we're trying to, you know, keep our fingers on the pulse of what needs to be measured. But definitely, you know, it's like Jim just said, it's like a rabbit hole. You know, it's really hard to decide what's the most important thing to measure. And we're hoping we'll get to a method of being able to do that pretty soon. I want to point out that that there's some red X's and kind of orange X's on this table. Some of our data in recent years is not really usable for various reasons. We have PCBs and organochlorines from 2019, which were all non-detect. We know that that's not real. And like PAHs from 2018 to 2020 had an inordinate number of non-detects. 2018, I think, was I don't know, I want to say it was like 85% or something like that non-detect, which was just astounding in our urban sites to have that many non-detects. And that number of non-detects actually went down in 2019 and 2020. This was a particular lab that did these analyses. And looking at their data for those 3 years, it gave me the impression that they were learning how to do the method as we went through those 3 years. They got better at it, but I just felt like those data were not usable for our trend analysis. We have a good data set for 2021 that we used to calculate our trends. Looking at fipronil, wow, we had a really hard time finding a lab to do fipronil in 2021. We settled on a laboratory that had a pretty good water method, but we're developing their sediment method. And again, I feel like we helped them get better at it, but there was still an awful lot of DNQs for the data set. You know, some of the data, like when the numbers were really high, the detections seemed reasonable, but there seemed to be a lot of mid-range and low-range numbers that were missing from those data. The question mark indicates that I went ahead and used the data for trend analysis, but we definitely, just amongst ourselves, feel like we need to get some more good years of fipronil data before we can, you know, state firmly whether the trends are going up or down. The last of the red X's are the PFAS numbers. You know, we had a laboratory that's really good at doing drinking water, do those tests, not so great in sediment, and all of those numbers were DNQs. And so, you know, we had 100% estimated data for those 2 years, which basically it's not worth a lot to the program. It gives us an indication of whether or not, you know, PFAS were in those samples. And, you know, those who know PFAS know that there's probably going to be PFAS in a lot of samples. And so we saw a lot of non-detects, a lot of estimated data. And so, again, you know, we're moving towards working with SGS Axis to try to, in some cases, start establishing good trends for like PFAS, but also to sort of confirm some trends, like with the organochlorines. You know, we really need a good set of data for those compounds, the chlorinated compounds, and then even pyrethroids, where we had you know, a couple of years of let's just say inconsistent data from 2021 to 2022. Again, those orange yellow X's got used in the analyses, but they were definitely a little odd. They were heavily diluted samples, so it's definitely a little bit weird. So the reason I'm showing you all of this is because we want to just sort of give a basis for us going, some reasons for us moving to this SGS access plan, which like I said is going to be quite a bit more expensive. And it also gives a bit of an idea of kind of the history and whether or not, you know, like we're always discussing this, like, should we stop measuring certain things and start measuring other things? And I think the reasons for doing that seem to become stronger and stronger every time we look at this table. So Kelly?
Yeah, sorry, I had to get the mute thing going. I wanted to just talk about this a little bit here. It seems like the right place on your slide set to talk about this. I'm very concerned about the lab switching that has been going on and the ability to actually look at chemical trends. So I know that it wasn't your choice and it wasn't anybody on this group's choice to do the bidding out and for Water Pollution Control Lab to close and all these other things that have happened. But I've just seen it too many times when people switch labs, they get different results. And there's the way people are doing the methods, learning, there's all kinds of other things that have happened. The Estuary Institute had a really big one on PCBs. We've been trying to do PCBs trends in the base because of the TMDL and saw a really big difference when we switched labs. So that to me is just a huge problem for a program that's supposed to be looking at trends to have to continue to switch labs. So I know you can't solve this. And I'm raising it because I think it's just exceptionally important for the future of the program to keep noting the issue here. And that's, sorry, I got stuff going on. So basically the issue is if you do that, then we're never going to be able to really have confidence in the chemical trends. So that's, I'm going to need to, I'm sorry, I've got a contractor at the door. So there's more I want to say, but I'm going to have to go let them in. I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, Kelly brought up the exact question I was going to talk about. Is there a vehicle for the program to set up a long-term contract with Axis so that we can have that surety that we'll be with them for, 3 to 5 years at least?
Yes. We are in a contract right now that goes through the end of 2026, I want to say. So I think we've got good stability for now, for the next couple of years.
That's great. Let's just assume that they do a good job.
Yes, I guess I feel good about them. They're like one of the very few labs that really specializes in matrices other than water. So they're very known for their solids and tissue analyses, which is why we are going with them. They're a lab that like actually does method development for US EPA. So they're just known as a great lab, basically great quality. And that's been our experience thus far with using them in our bioaccumulation program for tissue data. So we are hoping to see, and I know SFEI and the Bay RMP has used them for years. So they're pretty well vetted. And at this point, there's not really any other lab to go for that you can say like is really good at sediment. So I think we're kind of at the only choice we have, and we should be able to stick with them for a while.
So they've gone through all the state board hoops as far as QC and documented methods and all that stuff.
They're accredited up the wazoo, but I mean, honestly, most of these aren't even offered for like an ELAP accreditation, but they've got, all the accreditations they could have for other things. So
That's the best you can do, honestly. That's great.
yeah.
Good to hear.
And Kelly said, I know it's not anyone's choice or fault. And I'm like, actually, it's mine. I totally take accountability for all of this, but now I'm trying to fix it. So
and my apologies for stepping away for a moment. I basically do feel like the long-term solution here is for the state to think about establishing a lab with these kinds of capabilities. We work with Access and have for a long time. They're slow. They're really slow, and we've had
so to WPCL.
Yeah, that's true. At Access we've been wanting to do blank testing on a sampler, and we're finally able to do it now, and we've been wanting to do it since last fall. So that's just getting their attention and getting the results out of them has been really slow and delayed our work. And those who come to our emerging contaminants meeting this week are going to see the outcome of that, which is that we don't have all the data analysis we want either. So, but the most important thing is having a consistent lab. I'm wondering, just a couple other thoughts, and then I'll move on because I know there's a lot to cover and a lot of other people here. One is I'm wondering if you archive samples. Do you archive any of the samples so that they could be done for chemistry later?
We are going to this year. Under normal circumstances, in the last few years, we have saved back a jar of each sample. And but our storage capacity is limited also. 90 little jars takes up a fair amount of room. So because we're doing this abbreviated analytical job this year, we're going to our 90 sites, but now when you see the budget slide, this will make more sense, but we're going to do our traditional tier 2 40 sites for things like fipronil, for PFAS. So those are having 40 no matter what. The things that are going from 90 to 40 are pyrethroids, PCBs, and OCs. And so we will definitely save back samples from the other 50, with the idea that maybe we can, if we have to do a little bit of extra or some investigative work or whatever, those samples will be in our back pockets, but it's really about having the money to analyze them. We're coming out pretty even right here with the budget. So having the samples and having the money to analyze them are two different things. So
yeah, now the reason I'm raising archiving is particularly now when we're going through lab changes, you've had all these problems. It's like a full case for archiving samples for future analysis. It costs. I mean, obviously it's not free. You have to have enough freezer space, and it costs to keep the freezer, and you got to have power backup for the freezer so you don't lose all your samples. It's the kind of thing that analytical methods get better and cheaper, and down the line, especially if trends is an important issue, a management question for the State Water Board, chemistry trends are one, then it might be in the future that samples from every 2 or 5 years might be pulled and reanalyzed all at once by the same lab so that you'd actually get an accurate trend on something that's interesting in the future. So just to throw out the thought that the program consider an archiving piece to it to deal with some of this trend and chemistry issue that hopefully in the long term might get solved. And then the other, yeah.
Oh, I just wanted to say that's an excellent point, Kelly. Thank you for that. And that has come up in the past where we've realized that we have these data sets that are unusable, and we've wondered if there's some kind of funding from the state board to possibly reanalyze the samples, and that hasn't been an option in the past. But we will be saving samples this year with the idea that it is a new lab, but also with the potential for maybe some non-targeted analysis on samples, depending what questions come up. There's a lot of future questions that could come up, and we're really interested in having the capacity to look at that sometime in the future.
Yeah, we've archived like fish and other samples and are going back and doing longitudinal studies looking back with the archive samples with new funding. Some of them going back to 2008. So and getting really informative results. So that's why an archiving program is useful. It's not just for in the next few years. It's like, 10 years from now, 15 years from now, even if you only archived every 2 years, every 4 years, whatever. If you have an archiving program as part of this, it could end up providing a way to answer some management questions that you can't answer right now with the funding you have right now through special studies. Then just the other question about NTA, and this is maybe this comes up after the discussion. I'm just wondering if and how the agency partners that are using these kinds of data can use them for their regulatory work. So is NTA really something that's going to help us clue on sources of toxicity only, or is NTA also going to create data that could actually be used for various regulatory functions? So in my experience, NTA has not been suitable for the latter, and that's, to me, a really big decision. So I'll just throw that out there and let people think about it, but I'd be very interested in responses when we get to all of that. Thanks.
Go ahead, Mary.
And thanks, Kelly. Great comments, and you got me thinking. And I wanted to bring up the point that I'm not sure, I'm not on the swamp roundtable anymore, so I'm not sure how much visibility or awareness the regional coordinators do or don't have about samples that may or may not be archived, or could not be archived. And the timing of the spot sampling is really interesting because it's towards the end of the fiscal year, and at that time, not this year, but in years when it's dry and many of your planned monitoring didn't get done, regions might be able to say, hey, I have this pot of money still in the chemistry contract, and I'd like SPoT to use it for some of the samples they wouldn't have otherwise sampled. And if there was that archiving program and awareness of what samples are being archived, there might be an opportunity there to get some additional chemistry funding that would otherwise be unused or rolled forward for the next year. So anyways, just something for, maybe you're already thinking this, as maybe the regional coordinators are fully aware, but that's something that occurs to me as an opportunity that we might want to
Right. We'll keep that in mind. Okay, let's talk about trends. Real quick, how about we take a break? Seems like a good time before we go into trends. Everybody can give everybody 10 minutes. Does that sound good? Okay. How about we reconvene at 10:35?
Sounds good.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. Yeah. See that my bed meals. I think everybody's face has come back.
Yes.
Gallery.
It did not do.
But can't you just expand it? And, like you grab that and slide that over. This thing right here.
There we go.
I knew something about Zoom.
That's what you're.
That's why I'm the boss.
Yeah.
That's a scary thought. I know where the bodies are buried. Okay. I'm muted. That's not muted. Both videos are on.
Good. Okay.
Okay. We're there. Okay, off we go. NASA mission control here. Okay, trend analysis. Many of you might recall that when SPoT analyzed trends in the past, we would look at 3 different scales. We would look at the statewide scale for any given parameter. We would look at the individual site scale for any particular parameter, or we would bin those sites into different land use categories based on some very specific definitions, and then look at the trend just within those sites. And as you could tell from the previous slide, our sample size changes year to year. And we've been consistent at 90 for the last few years, and we're really trying to stick with that as much as possible. But increasingly, we've had, we had 75 for a few years because of budgetary concerns. We've had 100, we had 23 sites in 2009. And so what we've decided to do, and we're going to be going to 40 sites for some of these parameters this next year, or for the next couple of years. And so what we've decided to do is just look at these trends on a site-by-site basis, using these measured concentrations and toxicity endpoints, and then tallying the number of sites that have increasing or decreasing trends. And so this is something that I alluded to in our last SRC meeting. And we've actually, the slides you're going to see, the next several slides, we actually have on our website right now with some blurbs about, interpreting the data. But we're looking at these tallies of increases and decreases to try to give some indication of where the trends are happening, or how many sites are these actually going up or going down in. Do they balance each other out? You might have this statewide increase, or maybe even no trend statewide, but you have a large number of individual sites that have an increase or a decrease. And so it's just a new way of looking at the data that kind of accounts for these uneven sample sizes. So you can still take the median measurement of single parameters and look at statewide trends. And so we are still doing that. but we're not binning those sites based on land use. What we're doing instead is taking the median measurements from within each site and correlating it with agricultural and urban land use. So you'll have a significant you'll have an indication of a significant relationship with urban or agricultural land use. And so it's just a little bit of a different way of looking at the data that I think has been more constructive, at least from my personal point of view. Again, you know, we're always open to hearing comments about ways of looking at these trend data. If anybody wants to weigh in on any of that, feel free. But I wanted to give this quick overview of how we're going to be looking at trends in these next few slides. And when I say next few slides, I don't mean this one. This one is its own beast. And because we're the toxicology lab, I always like starting off with toxicity. And so the first thing I wanted to show everybody was this heat map. I call it a heat map. It's not a real heat map, but or is it? Is it kind of a real heat map? Okay, it's kind of a real heat map according to Bushra. But what I did was I wanted to give a way of looking at the hyalela toxicity in its entirety for SPoT. And so this is all 90 sites, 2008 to 2022, ranked left to right from sort of the least toxic to the most toxic. And I thought that this would be a pretty good instructional way of looking at the data because, you know, like if you're Emily from Region 4, you can go down to the area in red off to the right. You can see, wow, I have a few sites in there. You know, San Gabriel River, Bayona Creek, Bouquet Canyon. You know, Region 4 has 3 of the worst 10. You know, so I don't know if that's cause for concern or anything, but you know, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But they're ranked based on a pretty crude system of just sort of assigning numbers for toxic and non-toxic sites, just to give an indication of the overall amount of toxicity that we see throughout the years. It's interesting also to note how some sites switch back and forth. They're toxic some years and not toxic other years. And then you can always see those random red squares that pop up, you know, about 3/4 of the way down. You know, you'll see the aforementioned Bishop Creek sample, you know, which had been non-toxic since 2008, and suddenly it had 4% survival. So I just like looking at this because it gives a way of sort of encapsulating what SPoT is seeing year to year. You know, toxicity is still an issue. The beneficial uses that toxicity relates to are still being impacted. And SPoT is still capturing that year to year. You know, the bottom row, 2022, you can see there were still quite a few sites that were toxic compared to non-toxic. So, you know, it'd be really great to just see green all the way across, but that's not happening quite yet. So I feel like there's still a little bit of work to do. I only did this for hyalela survival because, you know, we could theoretically do this with any of the parameters if we assign bright lines between the different categories, but I did it with hyalela survival just to kind of give everybody an indication of what it looks like. But now we'll talk about the various trends. So just to orient everybody to the slides we're going to look at, the next 10 or 12 slides, they're going to come in pairs. And the first slide is going to be this positive and negative bar chart histogram that shows the percentage of sites with significant trends, either increasing or decreasing. And you know, the gray is the percentage of trends increasing, the black is the decrease, and you have the x-axis having the various parameters that are being measured. And so this is toxicity. So we have hyalela survival and growth, and then chironomous survival and growth. We're going to kind of run through these slides pretty quick, unless anybody has burning questions like Kelly. So why don't you go ahead, Kelly?
Oh, I was just really curious. Is there any meaning in the gray in the bar? I mean, so this isn't like a box and whiskers plot or anything. It's just I should be seeing the number on top and the number on the bottom are the numbers.
Yeah. Yeah, number on top and number of sites, percentage of sites that with increasing trends versus percentage of sites with decreasing trends.
Okay.
So in this particular slide, it's interesting to note that you have about the same number of sites that have increasing toxicity as decreasing toxicity. It's the same number with high level of survival. With chironomous growth, on the other hand, 15% of the sites are showing increasing growth, which is actually could be decreasing toxicity over time. The trend is to have increasing growth at 15% of the sites. There's no chironomous growth that's being, with decreasing numbers. So you can kind of see whether things are balancing each other out or whether it's skewed one way or the other. This will become more apparent during the pyrethroid slide.
Cool, thanks.
The second of each pair of slides is going to look like this. It's going to have those same set of parameters across the top. And the second row is going to indicate whether or not there's a statewide trend for that parameter. And then the third row is going to indicate whether or not there's correlation with an urban or agricultural land use. So you'll notice in this particular slide, the statewide trends for high level survival and growth, there's no trend increasing or decreasing statewide. With chironomous survival, the trend is considered stable. The difference between no trend and stable is it's just a statistical trend based on the Mann-Kendall analysis I'm using. But they're more or less the same result. With chironomous growth, we have a significant increase in chironomous growth statewide. And that's driven by what we saw in the previous slide, the 15% of those sites with increasing growth and no sites with significant decreasing growth.
Okay,
yeah, go ahead, Peter.
Yeah, thanks, Bryn. Just kind of maybe, basic question to ask and take it back a step. With chironomous, these samples, they're all sediment samples. So I'm used to more chironomous samples or monitoring in water column where I see a lot of problems. But with this in sediment, I mean, it's just a sediment. It's a solid sediment sample that you take. It's not collecting like a water sample along with it, correct? Or
no.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, this is just straight up sediment. The interesting thing, I mean, we could probably spend the next couple of hours talking about why chironomous growth is increasing, and it would be a lot of me kind of pondering about it and maybe some other people's ideas. And so I don't want to go down that rabbit hole too far, but chironomous growth is a wildly variable endpoint, and at this point, I'm not putting a lot of weight on this particular result because of that variability. Chironomous growth is an endpoint that defies the TST because of its variability, and so we're using a more statistical, traditional statistical approach to do the analysis for that endpoint. But it's it sort of is what it is. Rob?
Yeah, I actually have two questions. The first is, can you describe more of what the statistical approach you're using? Because from my understanding, you're doing this for individual sites. So I would assume that for sites that you don't have a large data set from like 2013 to 2022, you wouldn't be able to do some of these statistics on that data. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the Mann-Kendall test requires at least 4 data points to do the analysis. And according to the model I'm using, that's what they say. It'll kick out an answer as long as you have at least 4 data points. With things like toxicity, you get a data point every year. With things like chemistry, you will have a series of non-detects. We're using half the MDL for substitution. If there are not 4 actually measured concentrations, we're calling it no trend, because we're figuring if it's insufficient, like if they're all non-detect. In some cases we have all non-detects for pyrethroids in region 1 in the North Coast. So all of those results are no trends. The ends are obviously they differ by analysis and site. In some cases, we do have small ends. In some cases we have 15 data points. So it kind of ranges, but you're right. There is a minimum number that Mann-Kendall will allow us to do. The Mann-Kendall model I'm using.
Okay. And I don't want to go down the rabbit hole too much, but I do also have a follow-up question about the choice of species, because I think we've talked about, you and I have talked offline about relating chironomous toxicity with fipronil, and we're not really seeing those trends like we do with Hyalella with pyrethroids. I mean, that is a clear distinction. And I'm just curious, because we're struggling with this as well. In terms of maybe looking at a different species like Cerodaphnia magna that is more sensitive to the degradates in the water, because you've indicated that you are doing some water column testing. Because we're sort of struggling with that, like I said, to try to relate fipronil toxicity at all. And chironomous does not seem to be a really good indicator for that. So I'm just curious what your thoughts of species choice.
That's a great question. Chironomous is not living up to its name for fipronil. You're right about that. We're not really seeing that relationship either. But you'll be intrigued by a slide that's coming up, though. So the one thing that I come back to when I think about maintaining our testing with chironomous is I don't have that slide in this presentation, but I have put it in previous presentations, where when we look at just Hyalella survival, we have about 22% of the samples are toxic every year. When we add the Hyalella growth endpoint, that number goes up. I'm going to make up some numbers here because I can't remember them off the top of my head, but that number increases by 5, 6, 7%. If you add chironomous survival to it, then you go up another few percent. You add chironomous growth, you go up even more. So every time an organism or an endpoint is added, of the 4 you're looking at here on the screen, the percentage of sites with that have been synoptically tested with both species, the percentage of that number of sites that are toxic increases. So you capture more and more toxicity with every organism and endpoint. So even though chironomous is not, the survival and growth are not really linking to the fipronil concentrations, they are being impacted by something. And so there are toxic sites. Chironomous is toxic, toxicity to chironomous at some sites for some other reason than fipronil. It's not tracking with fipronil, but there is something going on there. And so I'm not really clear what that is. We don't really have the measurements to demonstrate it. It's not tracking with pyrethroids. No. The same, like you said, the same way that Hyalella survival and growth do, but maybe that'll bear out in the next few years.
Okay, thanks.
Real quick, back to your water question, though. you know, there are going to be, with this CEC work group collaboration we have coming up, we are going to be collecting water samples from these sites at the same time that we're collecting the sediments. And so, and doing chironomous in the water column. So we'll have some, you know, it's kind of an apples and oranges thing because it's two different compartments of the environment. But there will be some additional information based on that. At 20 sites.
Yeah, thanks. I might have misspoke. I meant Daphnia magna in the water column because I know that Fipronil is much more toxic to Daphnia.
Yeah. No, I picked up what you were saying.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Not a toxicologist, obviously.
But you're part of the team, man.
Right.
You're one of our chemists. Okay, pyrethroids. Same layout as before. We have, you know, our 8 individual pyrethroids that we've been measuring historically, plus in this case the sum of pyrethroids. There's a lot of measurements, a lot of papers that will sum pyrethroids since they're additive in toxicity. The thing I found most interesting about this slide was even after all these years, you know, we still have almost 25% of the sites with increasing bifenthrin trends, and you know, about 9% of the sites with a decreasing bifenthrin trend. And so it's definitely skewed to having bifenthrin increasing. Another interesting thing about this slide is the number of individual pyrethroids that have a lot of decreasing trends at individual sites. Permethrin, all decreasing, all of the significant trends were significant decreases, you know, at about 23% of the sites. The sum of pyrethroids is about equally balanced. So summing the pyrethroids and looking at the trends kind of washes things out a bit. It's much more interesting to look at these individual compounds.
Is that a weighted sum of pyrethroids, or is it just, are you still just adding them?
Can you
I mean, are you adding toxic units, so doing the ratios, or are you just adding the total?
No, that's a straight sum.
Oh, that's
the
not
toxic unit information is included in this slide.
Okay, cool.
I didn't calculate trends, those individual site trends for toxic units. But I did calculate them for the statewide trend and also the correlation with land use, which is in this slide. So this slide actually has one more column in it than the previous slide. Interestingly enough, there's no statewide trend for bifenthrin, even though, you know, almost 25% of the individual sites were showing increases. That kind of gets washed out when we look at it statewide. The only significant individual pyrethroid that was increasing was deltamethrin, which speaks a little bit to some information Rob gave us a couple years ago about deltamethrin and keeping an eye on it because he felt there would be some increasing use. Toxic units, although we didn't correlate them, or although I didn't do trend analysis at individual sites for toxic units, statewide, they continue to increase. And so toxic units is a way of, you know, you're dividing, sort of normalizing, you know, each individual concentration to its ability to cause toxicity compared to the LC50. And then because pyrethroids are additive, you can sum those toxic units. So when you look at the sum of those toxic units statewide, they are significantly increasing. I've shown box and whisker plots about this in previous SRCs, but I just have an arrow this time. You know, it's still going up. And as we've noted before, the correlation with land use, it's almost exclusively urban land use related. All of these high concentrations, elevated concentrations are seen in the urban environment. There's no significant correlation with agricultural land use. Our chlorinated compounds. I've taken some representative chlorinated compounds, a sum of chloridane, a sum of DDT, and a sum of PCBs, just to demonstrate that the percentage of sites that are increasing and decreasing is quite low. There's only a few sites that show significant increases. With DDT, there's a couple sites that show significant decreases. Generally speaking, all of these concentrations are quite low and are well below, in the case of chlorine and DDT, well below toxicity thresholds. As I mentioned previously, we haven't had a really good data set for these compounds in a while. And so we are going to measure organochlorine pesticides and PCBs at 40 SPoT sites this year to try to sort of put this trend to rest, and decide whether or not we need to continue monitoring it and perhaps how often we're going to monitor it. Interestingly enough, statewide, the sum of chloridane is increasing. It shows a significant increase. It's interestingly showing correlations with agriculture and urban land use. Some of PCBs is correlating with urban, but there's no other trends with these chlorinated compounds. Again, these are quite low concentrations in a lot of cases with these individual sites. If I can skip back to the previous slide, there's so many non-detects in a lot of these sites that the individual trends just came out as no trend. Fipronil. Fipronil is actually quite interesting. We have this, I've been looking at spot chemistry data for a lot of years now, and I get this gut feeling when I stare at a data set, and the Fipronil data sets I've looked at from the last couple of years have given me a little bit of a weird feeling, where I'm thinking the data might not be that great, and I don't have the chemical chops to really parse out the reasons why. But we've been putting our heads together. We've been talking with Tessa a lot, and we decided to go ahead and use the Fipronil data from the last couple of years to calculate these trends. And there's a lot of a lot of individual sites with significant decreases versus the sites that are significantly increasing. And I'm kind of taking that with a grain of salt, based in part on the chemistry data we've been looking at for 2021 and 2022. We are planning on doing Fipronil at all 40 tier 2 sites in 2023 and 2025. So we are going to continue. We're committing to maintaining this trend using trend analysis, using targeted analysis. Again, after looking at these sort of larger black bars, 2 of the metabolites are showing significant increases statewide, and then sulfone is significantly decreasing, being driven by that previously shown big black bar.
You have a question?
I don't know. Going back real quick to the organochlorines, Terry asked, could the increase in chloridane be related to conversion of ag to urban? That's certainly a possibility. It's not something that we've investigated. I think that would be something we'd have to drill into individual sites and actually look at where those increases are and what the historical land use is. But I think that's something we could probably get into at some point. Rob, you have a question?
Sorry. Yeah, question about the trends with fipronil. Have you looked at the trends by eliminating the last 2 years of data that's suspect?
I have
Get a
not done
sense.
that. No.
Okay, because this is a very important question to me personally, because there has
You
been
bet.
this change in the label restrictions for fipronil. So this is a big management question that you can relate trends to. So we're looking at this, very carefully. So it might be worthwhile evaluating trends, both, for maybe all of these, with eliminating the suspect data as well.
Right. Okay, we'll do that. Yeah, we'll do that for sure. When did the label changes go into effect again? Can you remind me?
Well, it was 2018 that we agreed with the registrants, and then they started rolling out the labels in 2019, and by 2020 they should have been all. But they have, they have stockpiles of old labels, but pretty much, I mean, by now they should all be the new labeled products.
Interesting. Okay,
Yeah.
good to know. Yeah, I actually, I mean, I did that with the PAH data. I mean, I eliminated a few years of data before I did the analysis because it was just completely skewing the results. But I should do that with fipronil. You're right. We'll take a look at that and get back to you. Yeah, speaking of PAHs, yeah, I basically for these trend analyses, I eliminated 2018 to 2020. It was just clearly driving everything down because of the lack of detections. We felt really good about the 2021 data set. 2022, this was not analyzed, so I felt like that 2021 data set was more in line with what we'd seen previously in terms of quality assurance. Again, these are, PAHs are in we only measure these at the 40 tier 2 sites, the sort of the most urban sites here and there. And we've seen, increasing trends, decreasing trends. A lot of these concentrations are really quite low. Again, in terms of a relationship to the toxicology, the trends, the numbers, concentrations are quite low. And sometimes they're going up and sometimes they're going down. And it seems for the most part, there's a pretty good balance of the up and the down. Statewide, there's no trends statewide. They're either stable or no trend. Again, it's interesting to note, in relation to Perry's earlier comment, that there are correlations with agricultural land use as well as urban land use. Even though we're measuring these at primarily urban sites, these urban sites do have agricultural components. So it still comes out. This is one of those things we're choosing to not continue to measure for the next few years. We're going to kind of stop it at 2021 and see how things go with the budget. But because we're not seeing any changes and the concentrations are quite low, we're going to not be measuring PAHs for 23 through 25. Organophosphates and PBDEs. Yeah, I didn't even bother making figures for this. There's basically not enough data points to calculate trends for what I consider sort of the three main organophosphate insecticides. We haven't really measured these for quite some time now. I think 2017 might have been the last year. There were only 3 sites with enough data to calculate individual site trends for PURIFOS, and all of those trends were stable or no trend. Again, we've stopped measuring these in 2017, so we're not going to continue to measure these at all in the next few years. Over the years, we've had some significant statewide trends for some PBDEs. They've gone up and they've gone down because of our labs being switched here and there. I've had to recalculate what the sum is, because not all labs seem to be able to do all congeners or have all the congeners I need in a particular list. So the current set of congeners shows that there's no significant statewide trend. You know, we did identify some increasing and decreasing trends at individual sites, 12 and 4 respectively. But because of the lack of statewide trend, we're also not going to be measuring PBDEs for the next 3 years. Again, as budget changes, you know, these are things that we can revisit, or if there's you know, a lot of interest by any particular party, we can talk about revisiting it. All right, so that's our trends. Are there any questions about any of these trends before I move on to our budget? Kelly?
Just a couple thoughts. One is it would really help if you showed the years for the trends on the graphs. You probably are going to do that anyway, but I was confused about which trend was which year set, since there's the data sets issue. And
right.
Yeah, so it's just cool to see that, but it's kind of hard to tell what it covers. And then the other thought is that a lot of programs like this, when they're starting to, I think right now you've kind of got a plan for the next few years. So this is more of a big picture, long-term comment. But at some point, folks start saying, well, maybe we should only do stuff every 5 years or every 10 years. You know, if the state really needs to continue knowing trends in some of these things. Because these chemicals are all bioaccumulative stuff, so they'll accumulate in the sediment. But what we're really concerned about is tissue concentrations, you know, fish tissue concentration, which isn't all that interesting, you know, may or may not be related to the sediment. So I don't know the answer to that question directly.
Yeah.
Yeah, but just sort of in general, when we're thinking about long-term planning, it may be that you're going to want to sequence some of these trend contaminant questions to have fairly long time frames. So if there hasn't been a trend for a long time and there is still interest in keeping an eye on it just once in a while, you know, maybe it's 5 years or 10 years between measurements. That's all.
Yeah, you're right on, bang on target for that. I mean, I think that's the way we can look at it. I mean, I think with some of these things, we don't want to ignore our past. I mean, SPoT's been doing this since 2008, and we still think it's important, you know, and I don't want to just, you know, wholesale get rid of it because I've worked so hard on it over the years, you know, and but at the same time, you know, when you're faced with just not having enough funding to, you know, drop 50 grand on PCBs, you know, because I think it's like 50 grand to do PCBs or 65 grand to do PCBs, you know, and that's like 10% of SPoT's budget, you know, for any given year to do something that I am not sure how important it is to people. And so this is where, you know, that kind of, that's where the state board comes in and the regional boards. You know, if it's important in a particular context that I'm not aware of, then we can make those decisions, you know, based on knowing those answers. But for us right now, you know, we're starting to work with the CDC work group. You know, our pesticide issues is obviously still driving a lot of what we're doing. We're still very interested in pyrethroids, fipronil. You know, we've been asked to start measuring PFAS. And so we're trying to pick up, you know, use some money to measure PFAS. and pay ourselves too, as part of all of that, so it's a delicate balance, but I think we have a good plan. Jason?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that, it may not be important to monitor levels of organochlorine compounds that are bioaccumulative because they don't seem to be changing. And we have all these existing legacy TMDLs where monitoring programs are going to have to continue until that TMDL gets addressed. So the data are going to be collected regionally for these specific programs. And my concern is that having a statewide agency say, oh, okay, well, it's not really a problem anymore, kind of sends the wrong message to the public and also can be used as leverage by the permittees as, oh, well, your state program says it's not a problem anymore, and so we don't need to worry about it. And so that's kind of what my concern has been about dropping these organochlorine compounds. I totally understand the funding issue, but I'm just concerned that the message may get out that, oh, state board considers that it's not really a problem anymore. So reasonable.
Yeah, I got to stop you right there. I didn't say it wasn't a problem. I said that we're going to stop monitoring it. I mean, you said it. Yeah, I don't want to be quoted as stating that organochlorines are not a problem. I do want to say that we don't think they're at toxic concentrations at SPoT sites. And we don't think the trends are really saying anything, and so we're deciding to back burner it. But I don't believe SPoT is sending that message that organochlorines are not a problem. I just want to make sure we're clear on that. But I know that there's a lot of TMDLs that are going on. I know particularly in your region, you guys are working with that. And I am, like, I've been in this business a long time, but I still don't have a super clear understanding of how TMDLs come to a conclusion. And I think like with us, SPoTs, when we go out and measure organochlorines, we go out and measure it at 90 sites. And your sites in your region, if our SPoT data are supporting your TMDLs, then we need to know that, so we can take that into consideration when we're making these decisions. That's one of the things I was talking about. And I definitely think that it's also it might be something that we can keep measuring these things on a regional basis. Maybe not be measuring them at all 90 sites, but maybe SPoT goes out and measures the organochlorines in the region 8 sites, or the Southern California sites, or whatever, whatever the subset is. And that's just like, I think we can continue to do that with open communication.
And I want to chime in really quick, just to speak to Jason for a quick second and say, I think that working with your swamp coordinator staff to, prioritize the funding they do have for specific parameters is key, but also keep in mind that the listing policy does allow for a smaller sample count to be used to justify decision making about the status of a water body being on the 50 listing order. And so if you have 3 years of data, you can use a different part of that listing policy to justify delisting. You don't have to gather up 20 some odd samples to make that case. So I do want to point out that those types of questions need to be right up front in the prioritization in coordination with both your integrated report staff and your swamp staff. And that's where those decisions and where the money goes, where those decisions about where the money goes should be. Not getting the swamp program to kind of keep sampling in high frequency to answer questions that some regions may not have, because we're going to use that trend section of the policy to be a list for those seed pesticides, for example.
Thanks, Mary. Sarah's got a hand up.
Yeah, go ahead, Sarah.
Hi, so I just wanted to, reflect on and echo what Mary just said about, the different ways to do sampling for trend analysis and decision making. The thing, because we're on the PPDE aspect, and I know we've got PFAS on sort of the monitoring radar, I just wanted to put out there a different way to look at the data when it comes to things like wildfire retardants or, emergency management chemicals, tools, and products, is looking at things like burn scars. We're doing long-term monitoring at these sites, and where are those particular impacts that might be feeding some of the general activities to prevent wildfire, but maybe also activities from that emergency perspective that have maybe contributed or been sort of a point source in a short-term period of time. So if these sites that had the increasing trends were, say, urban or subject to a major wildfire, that just might be something with the talking points when you're framing this particular bit of the conversation, and also might inform, why you're choosing certain compounds moving forward. And I'm only flagging this because the conversations had with emergency services offline. So just putting that out there as a thought process. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Sarah.
Such a good point, Sarah. Remember when all we could talk about was nonylphenol and those fire retardants?
Yeah, fun times when you have specific compounds that you're chasing.
Jason, I want to make sure that I didn't cut you off and that I completely answered your question. Do you have anything else that you wanted to add to that?
No, I just was saying that I don't disagree with dropping it from the SPoT program. It's just my concern about how it's presented, like in the report and in discussions with stakeholders, that it was dropped basically because of funding reasons more than because of we don't think it's important. You see what I mean?
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll make sure to keep those optics in mind, and when we're discussing things at meetings and any written documentation for sure. Thanks for that.
Yeah, I'd like to echo what Jason said about optics, because in the Newport Bay watershed and Orange County in general, they will grab on, the discharger community will grab onto anything that they think can support their view that we don't need to deal with these legacy pesticides and PCBs. So that's really where our
familiar.
is. Yes, we're in the process of revising.
With that community.
Yeah, we're in the process of revising, working to revise our organic fluorine compounds TMDLs, and the compliance date is already passed for that, and they're not in compliance, but they're obviously starting already to get their consultant team together to push back again on us. So.
Well, we'd like to maybe discuss further with you guys, maybe in the coming months. I don't know, whatever it is we can do to help with that from our point of view. I'm very interested in seeing how that process works.
Okay, and I think we should keep moving because we've got a lot of interesting topics still and not that much time.
Yeah, the most interesting topic of all. Right. So this is our 3-year budget. 23 SPoT season 23, 24, and 25, basically. The prices there in the parentheses are per sample prices for each of those sets of analytes. The price underneath the different fiscal years in the columns is the price for 40 samples. I might have added 2 QC samples into that price. So if anybody checks my math and they find it off a little bit, it's because there's a couple of QC samples added in there. I was also pointed out to me we probably do not need TOC analyzed in the 24-25 year, so that'll probably drop. But you can see on the bottom sets of rows, the available funding and the analysis subtotals, and the total available and the analysis total fairly closely match one another. The plan is to do pyrethroids in 23 and 25 at 40 sites. We're doing OCs and PCBs at 40 sites, but just this year to get a good data set since we haven't had a good data set since 2017. We're going to keep going with fipronil, like I mentioned in the trend analysis slides. We're going to do that in 23 and 25. We're really keen to establish a good baseline trend with PFAS, and so we'll be doing that at 40 sites in all 3 years. And then the TOC measurements are really there to accompany the organic carbon correction that we do with the pyrethroid concentrations. And those will get done with the pyrethroids in 23 and 25. You'll notice in the available funding section, there's some really big numbers under 23 and 24, and then a pretty small number under 25. And that number, as I mentioned previously, is just indicates that we've pulled back some of that chemistry lab funding and maintained it in the UC Davis contract. And we just wanted to have a little bit more discretion about where that money went in 25. And so we didn't want to commit it to the statewide laboratory contract. We're able to put that money towards that laboratory and towards additional targeted analysis with Access SGS if we have to. But that money also might get used for some additional non-targeted analysis, a decision we'll make at a later date. I'm just going to check my notes real quick to make sure I've said everything I wanted to say about this. I noticed Kelly has asked which PFAS will be analyzed, and I don't have that information off the top of my head right now.
List of 38, the same we had from Babcock.
From Babcock. I can send you the list of compounds if you'd like that.
It's the Axis targeted set. Okay, so so you're not doing any top analysis or anything else like that.
Hey, Brent, looks like you've got a 10% cost inflator in for TOC, but not for the other analyses. Is that a contracted price?
Ooh, good eye, Jim.
You stable?
Yeah, TOC is being done so all of these samples get sent to Babcock as the clearinghouse laboratory. They're the ones with the statewide contract. Babcock then will send all the contaminant analysis to SGS Axis. The TOC is actually going to go to another laboratory. And so what you're seeing is you're seeing a straight SGS Axis price for the next 3 years. I did not inflate that price because I just got a single quote from them. Whereas I do know that the TOC is going to inflate over the next couple of years. So these numbers are these numbers are a bit ballparky. You know, I'm assuming that the Axis prices will probably be a little bit higher in 25, 26. Because things go up every year, except for toxicity tests.
And could you send that list of PFAS around and also include the reporting limits? I was trying to hunt that down and I don't see the data and see the other. And the
Can you say that again, Mary? We kind of lost you there.
Oh, sorry. I was asking if you could send the list of PFAS and its reporting limits and methods to all of us. I'd like, or at least to me too. I'd like to see that. And I was looking for it.
We can attach that. We can send that to the whole group after this meeting.
Thank you.
Yeah.
My AEO is very interested in that piece of this program.
And there's a ton of interest in PFAS. We just did dialogue with all the agencies. I think every agency said PFAS was a high priority. So it would also be interesting to know which sites you're doing for other reasons. So you said those are 40 sites in 23, 24?
Yeah, it's all of these analyses are happening at our tier 2 sites. So it's the sites that we traditionally do fipronil at anyway. So we're just going to continue with those 40 sites. It's they tend to be more urban, but we're trying to measure the compounds in sites where we're likely to see the compounds. We're sort of avoiding a lot of sites that are just that have just been traditionally non-detects.
Yeah, no, that makes really good sense. I'm just thinking about that there's probably going to be a lot of other PFAS monitoring going on for various reasons around the state. So having good communications with folks, we're designing some stuff, so I want to coordinate with you on that. Yeah, and then another question, which I'm sure you can't answer in yes, but I was just wondering if you had thought about organophosphate esters. That's the other one that's popping up as being of a high concern. We're re-examining our emerging contaminants prioritization. It's for the Bay, so it's not for the creeks. And we're finding that PFAS and organophosphate esters are popping up into a new a higher category, I guess is the nice way to put it. So I was just wondering if any thought had been given to those.
No, not at all, but we will be giving it some thought now.
Yeah, so stay tuned. PFAS are a higher priority, I'd say.
Thank you.
Rob, you have a question?
Yeah, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but circling back to Kelly's previous yeah, I do. Okay. But circling back to Kelly's previous comment about how this data is used for decision making from the regulatory agencies, right? And I just am looking at the OC pesticides column, and it's a considerable budget for this year. And I'm just curious, could that money be utilized in a different, in filling out one of these other columns for these other current pesticides or current interest contaminants? Because I'm just curious, like overall, what are you said you're going to use this data to fill out, because we haven't monitored since 2017, but say you collect this data and there's either it indicates there's no trend difference or an increasing trend or a decreasing trend. How does that information inform the regulatory agencies of what to do with OC pesticides? Because DPR is certainly not going to have any authority to do anything about those contaminants. And I'm not sure if the water boards are going to use that for increasing the number of TMDLs or delisting, but how is that information going to be utilized? Because to me, if it's just out of curiosity's sake, I would up the ante for the PFAS or fipronil, which are two categories that have a high interest right now. So just throwing that out there.
That's great. That's exactly what we've been talking about, this whole time. I don't know the answer to that question. I mean, we had Jason and Terry weigh in a little while ago, and they thought that it was important to make sure that we're not being dismissive of those compounds. And there are a lot of TMDLs going on. And of course, I'm sure that we're supporting those TMDLs in Region 8, but I'm not sure if we're supporting them anywhere else. I don't know. Like I said earlier, I'm not sure how you end a DDT TMDL. It's such a long-lived chemical. It doesn't necessarily exceed a toxicity threshold in any given instance, but it also doesn't ever seem to go away. And the trends, the concentrations that we're measuring at most SPoT sites are really, really low. And so the trends kind of get washed out just by the non-detects, So I'm not really sure how important it is, and so I'm reaching
No,
out
I mean-
to the state water board and the regional water boards to tell me, what that is. Cause yeah, I'd love to save $100,000 on OCs and PCBs and put that to PFAS or something that's, that's going to expand our awareness of the contaminants relationship to the toxicity. Cause I think that that's what's pretty important. And I think I honestly feel that after my decades in this business, that's the direction we should be going in terms of monitoring. And I've been kind of nudging SPoT towards that, in the last few years. And the toxicity and the relationship to the chemicals, I think, is the most important thing. And I'm hoping that our regulatory models will get to that at some point, instead of trying to regulate based on these single compound issues. Like, I don't know how much money we spend every year on pursuing DDT TMDLs, but I personally think there's some fatter fish to fry. So, with all due respect to, having to do battle with people like Orange County, because I know those guys, we do have to figure out ways to put these things to rest. So will these data help do that? I'm not sure. Terry, can you help me out?
Yeah, we've never considered the organic chlorine compounds to be at concentrations high enough to cause toxicity. And I think Kelly spoke to this as well. I'm sure other folks are aware of it. So it's not that. We've always said it's bioaccumulation, biomagnification within the food web. And in particular, in our watershed, it's primarily concerned for probably birds. Though we're still going to have to take another look at fish tissue. And we did have a trend monitoring program in place for about 10 years, kind of like SPoT, though the funding wasn't always consistent. And so it does appear that the toxicity we thought was likely linked at that time to pyrethroids. But obviously PFAS is of concern, and they're starting to see it in fish tissue, especially in the Midwest and back east. I don't think we've got any kind of monitoring program for PFAS in fish tissue in California yet, maybe some sites in Northern California. So I agree. In my view, that's the larger thing. We were just wanting to ensure that the reasoning and any, that's put forth for discontinuing or shortening the monitoring, let's say, to every 5 years for these legacy pesticides and whatever else, possibly some organophosphates. It's clear that it's budget primarily, as well as these compounds may not be causing toxicity. That doesn't mean that, there's not another reason for having to have TMDLs to address them. And I agree. TMDLs, I always call them the never ending story. You just move through different phases, and we've had discussions with EPA, and it's like they want to keep a TMDL in the books forever, essentially, to ensure that there's no backsliding. And which frustrates, as you can imagine, the discharging community, because they want to be able to say, hey, we've done it, we've met our TMDL, now we can delist. Well, delisting doesn't even remove a TMDL. So I'm sure Mary's nodding her head. So yeah, so it's, unless we can change the regulatory landscape somehow in the future, that's the way it's going to continue to be.
Right. Okay.
Okay, Peter was next.
Oh yeah, I just wanted to bring up that we also have a DDT legacy pesticide TMDL in the Santa Maria watershed in our region, and then it doesn't really rely on SPoT because there isn't a SPoT site. Well, there might be a SPoT site in that region.
Santa Maria River.
Yeah, so but they're supposed to be implementing through the individual programs, the stormwater program and the ag program, so that data should be coming in elsewhere. But I did think so I would kind of agree with, like, this could be dropped from your budget, or but maybe some longer term sampling, like bigger intervals. And then also, when I've looked at the data, and it's been a while, like looking at specific the specific chemicals and breakdown products and trends and how they're changing is helpful for folks to see that they are breaking down. And then but then so your total might not change that much, but maybe which chemicals we're seeing if it's more breakdown product. And then final note is that the pyrethroids, I think at a state level, we want to rely on those in your program. I mean, so bumping up things like that and fipronil that we can point to statewide programs is super important to be able to see the trends, because it's really difficult at the local level to see any trends with those. And we're relying in the TMDLs we wrote for pyrethroids, relying on statewide efforts. So we really need to bump up that monitoring and keep it, you know, as rigorous as possible. So, yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Peter. Sarah?
So I just wanted to, I'm not going to touch the TMDL issue. That is for a different group of people, but I did want to just raise awareness of some of the things that other Waterboards groups do get involved with on topics like DDT. So my team actually was asked to provide feedback and comments on AB 343 Marachi, which was a DDT focused chemical dump site bill that was put in at one point. And so the thing is, like, what is the kind of information that SPoT could be contributing to in terms of like the conversation? If monitoring on some of these compounds could, you know, advance public relation understanding, or, you know, provide some different ways to, again, frame the optics. It's something that some of these compounds that are older in legacy no longer maybe have active management actions for them. It is also potentially an opportunity for public awareness and conversation on that. So just kind of spinning it that we are still talking about some of these things in that way, just as a different way to look at it.
Right. Thanks. That's a good point. Mary?
I'll keep it short. I like the idea of maybe if there's still time to talk about the parameter list in this budget, discussing with the TMDL and our integrated report roundtables, or just some key people from those roundtables. And then I will just say, I'll just share my opinion. I think OC pesticides belongs with the accumulation program, the statewide bioaccumulation program, and their stream effort for sure. I think measuring it here and identifying the risk of bioaccumulation in our ecosystem is important, but I would put my money somewhere else in the SPoT program.
So just to read a couple of comments from folks, you know, we've been talking about this issue with the chlorinated compounds now for several years, and we've decided on, we went from sampling them every year to sampling them every 3 years to sampling them every 5 years. And I think in 2017, we were on the every other year program. In 2019, that data set blew up on us. And so now Kelly points out that we're at the 5-year mark. So it might be good to just get this one in and then maybe go to a 5 or 10 year cycle moving forward to be just a bit more definitive about the state of these trends, you know, with what we're considering, you know, a higher quality laboratory. And then Ashley pointed out that, you know, we should, you know, the thing that we always seem to lose the thread of sometimes is thinking back to our management questions. You know, our management questions focus on toxicity and contaminant concentrations. And then there is a bioaccumulation oversight group, the STU, I forget what STU stands for these days, but they're looking at fish tissues throughout the state. They're under similar budgetary constraints as I understand it. And so, but I know that those guys, Safety E work group, thank you. Those guys are picking up on a lot of this. I'm not sure what they're doing in terms of organochlorines or PCBs.
They do measure them at some sites where it's kind of like known or suspected to be an issue.
Right.
Not, it's targeted basically based on previous knowledge.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jason.
Yeah, and it really depends on the particular project for what fish they focus on, and it's kind of starting.
Gotcha.
They're shifting that a little bit. So.
Well, this has given us some food for thought, and I think just in the interest of time, I'm gonna move on from this slide, and but might follow up with the SRC about this decision to I mean, keep in mind that this is OCs and PCBs for 40 sites as well. It's not even the 90 sites. It's only a subset of SPoT sites. And so, it's, if we did the entire 90 sites, it'd be a couple $100,000. So, but we can talk about that as a follow-up, and maybe we'll consider expanding some of the other groups. And anyway, we'll talk to you guys about that soon. I just want to, I know there's only really 15 minutes left here, and so I really want to go through a little bit of the non-target stuff. I haven't relied on this as heavily in this particular presentation, but I do want to talk about what the work that's been going on at UC Davis in Tom Young's lab. Dr. Thomas Young, runs this group that does these analyses, among other things, and Anna Furyk is one of his PhD students that's doing this work for us. And so there's basically, for those of you who don't understand non-targeted analysis, it's a sort of a broad screen to try to identify as many things as you can in a sample using some more general methods of extraction and analysis based on library searches within GLC. And the way I understand it, I'm not an expert, and so this is going to be kind of a paraphrase. But the way I understand it is, there's these different levels of confidence in what your features are. You start out with these features that the instruments are identifying, and then as you move up through the levels of confidence, those features become structures, and those structures can become actual chemicals with concentrations. So this has all come about through this collaborative project that we started a couple years ago, actually. We have samples from 2021 that were given to Tom Young's lab. Anna started doing the work on them a little while later. And so there's 30 samples. Anna, as part of her PhD work, has actually added 70 standards to these samples. So we are getting concentrations, actual concentrations for 70 different compounds that are mostly pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, insecticides, but there's also some pharmaceuticals and some personal care products in the list. It's a pretty robust list, I think, so it'll be really interesting to see what we get out of that. As part of this study, they've extracted these samples, and then we've done toxicity tests on reconstituted portions of those extracts. So we actually have high allele survival numbers based on reconstituted portions of these extracts. These are the samples that we're going to eventually do our behavioral analysis on. But as a way of range finding for those behavior tests, we did just straight up survival toxicity tests. So we do have magnitudes of toxicity in the extracts for those 30 samples. We also have all of the high allele sediment results and all of the chironomous sediment results for those samples. And so what Anna's done is she's taken her preliminary data set and she's done some correlations with those, with the features that she's identified. So if you see this inverted triangle here, there's basically thousands of features that pop up in these analyses. And there's a lot of unknowns, a lot of peaks in these results that are unknown. And even some of those unknowns are even correlated with the toxicity results. And when I say correlated with the toxicity results, it's all of the results I just said. It's high allele survival, it's high allele growth, it's chironomous survival, chironomous growth, and then it's high allele survival in these extracts. she has not identified which particular toxicity endpoint these things are related to. She's just given us lists of the compounds that are related, the confirmed structures that are related to toxicity, the probable structures related to toxicity, and the tentative structures related to toxicity. These are partial lists. So they're sort of the top four from each of those lists. And the first thing that was most interesting to me is, to continue with our classic SPoT story of toxicity being related to pyrethroids. We have permethrin and bifenthrin in our confirmed structure list. So that was kind of pretty obvious to us. But we also have fipronil popping up as being related to one of these endpoints. And then probably most interesting to me is the galaxolide coming through. And a few years ago, some of you might recall that we did have some extra chemistry funding in SPoT's portion of the statewide chemistry contract, and we did some galaxolide measurements for DTSC. And so it was interesting to see that toxicity is being correlated with galaxolide. Again, correlation is not causation, but it does give us an idea of things we should be looking for. You might notice that in the probable structure column, we have PPDDE. We actually have a metabolite of DDT. And again, very interesting. When you go back and look at those actual concentrations, though, those concentrations are not really high enough compared to the known toxicity thresholds for that DDT metabolite. It might just be something that's co-occurring and so co-tracking with the toxicity. But there's also a lot of other things here that that SPoT is clearly not normally going out and measuring, but could be interesting. Both from the viewpoint of trends monitoring, but also when it comes to a group like the CEC work group or at the State Water Board or other CEC groups, knowing that these chemicals are being related to toxicity could help shape priority lists and directions for those different work groups. So we're very interested in how this relates to toxicity and how it might support trend analysis moving forward based on what was classically supported by targeted analysis. And so my first question, and this is the crusade I went on during the last SRC meeting, that hey, if these guys can measure permethrin and bifenthrin, then why do I have to do targeted analysis? And I was promptly corrected, and people said, well, the sensitivities aren't the same. And so the first question I had for Anna was, well, what are your reporting limits and method detection limits? Like, what would you consider a reporting limit for this particular data set? And so I asked her to put together just like, she's a grad student. She was struggling to get even this to us in time for this meeting. And so I pressed her for her top 5 bifenthrin concentrations. And I compared those measurements that she got through this process, this non-targeted process. And she's got one more step to do. She still has to run it through the NCI to really get the concentrations good, but the concentrations that she measured are actually, they ballpark pretty well with the targeted analysis concentrations. More importantly, though, I was interested in those reporting limits and the method detection limits, and yeah, I don't think I'm not going to bother sharing my screen with that. I'll just give it to you in a narrative. I didn't have time to make a slide for it, but basically the reporting limits that Eurofins gave us through the Babcock laboratory ranged from like 1 to 10, and Anna's reporting limit was like 5. So I think that we're definitely, you know, in the same factor as what the analytical lab is providing for targeted analysis is what Anna's providing for non-targeted analysis. So we're definitely, you know, they're not like we were concerned that we would be orders of magnitude apart, you know, that you know, Anna would be at like 10 or 100 compared to, you know, Eurofins being 1, but it's actually Eurofins range from 1 to 10, and Anna's reporting them was 5. And that's nanograms per gram. So I think that, you know, with a little bit more development, you know, we could probably maintain some of these targeted trends with non-targeted analysis, as long as there's standards that are associated with it. So I won't beat that dead horse anymore. But I do want to just kind of state that I find all these data really interesting. I love that it relates to toxicity, and that these are things that we can explore on a more focused basis. I'm excited to see what the next phase of these analysis brings with our work with the CEC work group, and I'm hoping that we can slowly but surely start incorporating more of these types of analyses with SPoT. There was a question earlier, and I think this came from Kelly, and it's something that we anticipated, where somebody had asked about how these data, you know, these types of non-targeted analysis data factor in with data from like an established sort of state certified, you know, analytical laboratory under this state contract. And I feel like the data quality are probably pretty good. I mean, Tom's lab's not a state certified laboratory, you know, so these are going to be some questions that we have to ask about whether or not the quantitative data that he's providing as part of this process is going to, you know, be able to reside in a database, say. You know, is that going to be considered as passing muster, passing QA muster? And these will be questions that we'll have to work out with the state board moving forward. Or are we going to have like a commercial laboratory do these types of analyses? I shudder to think what SGS Access would charge for this, because Tom's really quite reasonable overall. So a few more questions than answers, and a bit of a teaser for the data, but we're excited about it, and we're hoping we can incorporate this in the future. Rob?
Yeah, so I don't think anyone would question the quality of Tom's lab. I mean, he's fantastic at what he does. But my concern would be that you're kind of actually painting yourself into a corner, because as far as I know, he's one of the only people who does NTA analysis and does it well. So do you have thoughts like for the future, like expanding this type of analysis out to a commercial laboratory? You mentioned that, but I don't know anyone who would really pass muster besides Tom, actually.
That's a good point. I know I was told by the CEC folks that Babcock's actually doing some NTA for PFAS right now in water. And so I think that it's something that's going to start happening, you know, as we move forward. And yeah, and that is a larger question, you know. I don't know if Tom wants the job, you know. I think Tom would love to see this work incorporated in monitoring programs, because he believes in it, and he really believes. It's really fun to get him on a soapbox. We had a good old guy rant the other day together, which was pretty fun. But he believes in this as a tool, you know, when you're linking the NTA with the toxicity, and he really thinks that the regulatory side of this should be looking at that relation, should be looking at regulating based on that relationship, as opposed to just the sort of concentration based thing that we've traditionally done.
Okay, we've got
Whether
one
or
more
not
minute. Can we get
SPoT
to
becomes,
Kelly? Can we get to Kelly in our last minute?
we don't have to end it at noon, do
But
we?
some people might have places to go.
Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Kelly.
Like Kelly.
Yeah, I've got a couple things. One is really from the last slide. I didn't see the metals listed, and I really want to make sure you're still going to be doing that copper so we can get the breakdown.
We are doing metals every other year, Kelly.
Okay, so it wasn't on the slide, but it's still happening.
Yeah, that was just an organics budget.
Okay, cool. And then on this stuff, our advisors in the emerging contaminants program at the Estuary Institute also love non-targeted analysis. And Rob will hear a bunch of this because I think he's going to sit in on the meeting this week. And they love it for two things. So one is they always want to find the new pollutant. So it's like there's a whole group of people, all they want to do is find the new pollutant, and non-targeted is really good for that. It's also really good for trying to link to toxicity, because if you can do the fractionation work, you can get smaller and smaller fractions, and that's how they found 6-ppd-quinone. And so in that sense, non-targeted seems like a really cool partnership to a toxicity monitoring program. So in that sense, these ideas are really exciting and compelling, because it does help at least try to figure out what the chemistry is that's associated with some of the effects that you're finding. That's a pretty difficult academic exercise. It does strike me that there's a really big difference between the academic world and the real world. And I think that what Rob said is actually really important about labs and long-termedness. If you follow up a non-targeted identification with the standard into a quantification, that is basically a targeted analysis. So that is useful. If it's not a state certified lab, there's the whole question that I asked that I think other people need to answer about the usability of these data for regulatory functions. So yeah, I've got some real pro and con feelings about this. So it's a little different set of management questions I feel get answered by it.
All right. Okay. I just wanted to update everybody on the fact, you've been listening to me talk about writing a pyrethroid story paper for the last couple of years, and it was in preparation for a while. It got kind of backburnered a little bit in the last couple of years. And since a couple of years went by, we added more data to the paper, and I've turned that paper over to Bushra. And so Bushra's going to be tweaking that paper and getting it up to speed, hopefully in the next few months. And we'd like to see that coming out pretty soon. In terms of our reporting output, we've been focusing a lot on just having sort of the latest data appear on a website somewhere. Right now, the only website that has those data is granitecanyon.org. We've been working, we're going to start working, Tony, I should say, this year to have those data migrate to the state water board's website. We're going to try to revamp our section of the state water board website to come under our toxicity and contaminants program, and then have a SPoT section within that website. That'll probably be where most of the reporting goes in the near future, until we come up with the best way to create specific products. There will probably be sort of a more frequent update of websites and a creation of fact sheets within those websites to keep up with SPoT reporting. And that's sort of it for this edition of the SRC meeting. I agree with Jim that we should have a person-to-person meeting so we can eat lunch and drink beers. Definitely a good idea, always a good idea. And that way I can see everybody's faces too.
Yeah. So I just had a couple action items that I'll say. We're going to send out the PFAS analyte list with reporting levels. And I have all of the organics analyses in just one spreadsheet. So I'll just send all that out so you can see the analyte list for all the organics and their reporting levels from SPoT Access. Bryn and company are working on a monitoring plan for this year where it will spell out what sites they're doing and what analytes at each site. So it sounds like we're going to have a little more discussions to finalize that. But once that is final, we'll send that out to the group so y'all know what they're actually doing this year based on this discussion. And it sounds like there's definite interest in our next SRC meeting being in person or, hybrid. So, we would still have a virtual option for people who can't travel, but yeah, Tony and I can definitely work on the logistics of that with the UC Davis folks. And last year we started doing both a spring and a fall SRC just to because there is a lot to talk about. Obviously can barely fit it in 3 hours. So I think we're still planning on doing a fall one where we can kind of continue these discussions and hopefully start talking about what makes sense to do in 2024 in fall so that we're not making a lot of changes a month ahead of time. So we'll get that scheduled earlier rather than later, just so it can get on people's calendars and especially if we might do that in person, then you can make your travel arrangements if you need to.
Great.
Well, thanks so much everyone for coming. It's always great to see the turnout and the interest and really good discussion. And I think we're gonna get busy on finalizing this monitoring plan and what we should be monitoring this year.
Thank you all for participating.
Thanks.
See you soon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Hey, Kelly, this is Terry. Don't forget to send me your email of the typical Waterboards address.
I put it in the chat.
Oh shoot, I didn't see it.
It's Kelly M at sfei.org. Have you got it?
Okay, Kelly M. And
Yeah.
then your last name. Okay,
Yeah.
got it. Thank you.